We need Julian Assange. And one thing I want to say to you today is, it is not only that he is the victim of torture, it is not only that his life is at stake, it is not only we want to save him from a dreadful injustice, we also want to save him because the world needs Julian Assange as a symbol and fighter for liberty in these times.
Anton Karas and the Third Man, as you know, and at the very top, Craig Murray back in November at St. Pancras Church in London, back 2019, November 30th. And Craig Murray is our guest today. That's it, just Craig Murray. I'm Randy Credico, live on the fly, Assange Countdown to Freedom, WBAI 99.5 FM, all of that. In North Carolina, my engineer and chief editor is Kelly Lane, and it's just two of us here. And like I said, Craig Murray's been following this trial of Julian Assange's bogus charade that's going on. I guess that's redundant at the Old Bailey. So he's put out a report every single day at craigmurray.org.uk. You can see him, and he's been with us now for 4 years. We've had many interviews with Craig Murray. He's a one of a kind. And go there, check out his website, craigmurray.org.uk, and get your own, subscription. You don't have to subscribe, but you can read all 17 dispatches from both Belmarsh and from the Old Bailey in London. All right, so we're going to go right now. Come right back with Craig Murray. This week, his favorite tune is, we've been playing it for 4 years, is Logical Song by Supertramp. So we'll be right back after this little pastiche from Supertramp's Logical Song with the great Craig Murray.
When I was young, it seemed that life was so wonderful, a miracle. Oh, it was beautiful, magical, and all the birds in the trees they be singing so happily, oh joyfully, oh playfully, watching me. But then they sent me away, teach me how to be sensible, logical, oh responsible, practical. And then they showed me a world where I could be so dependable, oh clinical, oh intellectual, cynical. There are times when all the world's asleep, the questions run too deep.
Supertramp and Logical Song, which of course is the theme song for the guest that we have today. By the way, I'm Randy Credico. This is Randy Credico Live on the Fly, Assange Countdown to Freedom, episode 42, also on WBAI 99.5 FM Free Speech Radio in New York City. And as I said, Supertramp, we've been playing that for, I think, 4 years now. We've had the great pleasure of having conversations with the great diplomat, writer, right now, the face, the man, the voice, your man in the public gallery, Craig Murray, who has been for the past 3 weeks on a daily basis putting out what are basically Atlantic feature piece articles on a daily basis, recapping, I think mostly from memory of that day's events inside the Old Bailey. Well, at any rate, Craig Murray, the logical man, thank you for joining us again.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you for inviting me.
I want to begin by this Old Bailey thing. You talked about it in your very first dispatch on September 7th, I think, September 8th, the next day afterwards about going into this building with only 3 people. The Old Bailey is just, what the hell is the Old Bailey for those out there who don't know?
Yeah. It's London's highest criminal court, and it's on the scene of the old. It's on the site of the old Newgate jail. So there's been a criminal court on this site for at least 500 years, and possibly up to 700 years. And Bailey, of course, was the name for a fortified enclosure. So it was hard up against, on the corner of the ancient London City Wall, and it's where criminals were tried back in medieval times. And really, up until the 1830s, if you were convicted there of even very small things like, stealing a handkerchief or whatever, you would immediately be taken out and hung straight away. So there are literally, over 500-600 years, there are thousands and thousands of people who were hung right outside the place, and then buried under the street. So it's a very peculiar place. It was rebuilt in the 1900s and the 1930s. So now it's still on the same site, but it's like a grim Soviet-looking building now. And when we go into the public gallery, we have to climb 132 steps to get into the public gallery where we're going. Every morning I have to climb up 132 steps to get into the public gallery, because they're deliberately holding this trial in the most obscure corner of the building. There are several dozen, the most obscure one.
Right. How many trials can take place simultaneously in that building, or is there just one main?
No, there 20 or so trials take place simultaneously in the building.
By the way, I was reading about John Wilkes in the 1770s, 1780s, and people that were supporters of his who were actually hanged outside of that, or outside of that building in the 1780s. In fact, Thomas Paine, he writes about it in Common Sense. He used to see, and you're not exaggerating when you say kids would be hanged there for the smallest of charges.
Yeah. No, there's a great deal of evil in that place.
Yeah. So now, can you feel it walking up those stairs? 132. I can't even imagine. What is that, like 5-6 flights of stairs?
It's more like well, at least a minimum of 8 to 10 flights of stairs, depending how high your ceilings are. Yeah.
And you went there the very first day, and you've been there ever since. And it's only, it's not a throng. It's a little group of like 4 or 5 people that are able to get into the public gallery, including John Shipton.
Yeah, only 5 people are allowed in the public gallery. I mean, it has 42 seats, but they're only, and of course the excuse is COVID, but that's not.
Yeah. Is it COVID? Is that the reason why?
Yeah, but we, you're supposed to be 6 feet apart, and we could have easily 15, 16 people in there and all be 6 feet apart. They're 42 seats, so you don't need only 5 people because of COVID.
I bet you they'd like to not have you in there at this point. How are you getting along with? I know they were very nice to you in Balmoral, but how are they treating you here?
Yeah, I mean, the ordinary working men, the security guards and people have all been extremely nice and extremely helpful, and we've struck up good relationships with them. They're absolutely fine. The authorities aren't fond of me, and I should say as well that other groups like Amnesty International, like PEN, the International Writers' Freedom Group, Reporters Without Borders, all these groups haven't been allowed in. And not only that, they've not been allowed to follow on the internet.
You've got to be kidding me. How is that possible? Who makes that, who puts up that barricade against groups, formidable groups, internationally respected groups like that, from monitoring the trial?
No, that was the judge. And in fact, the court officials registered 40 such groups. And then on the day of the hearing, they all had their access closed down by the judge. She said she decided it was in the interests of justice that they shouldn't be allowed to observe. I mean, how you explain that, I don't know. I genuinely cannot think of any single argument why it would be in the interest of justice for Amnesty International. We've had 8 members of the European Parliament had their access cut off, so they can't watch. It's quite extraordinary. They've closed the public gallery to almost everyone. They won't let human rights groups observe, and the media have all. It's been a very spectacular trial with some amazing witnesses and some incredible evidence, and the media have hardly covered it at all. In the States, the Washington Post or the New York Times have hardly had anything about it at all.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, you're right. The witnesses have been spectacular. But from the very outset, it looks like it is so rigged and such a political trial, and they're not even making any semblance of an attempt to make it look like it's an objective proceedings. Who's really calling the shots in your estimation, what you've been able to deduce watching this on a regular basis, or every day actually?
Well, the prosecutor is acting on behalf of because it's an extradition case. He's acting on behalf of the United States government. He's not acting on behalf of the British government. He's acting on behalf of the US government. And essentially, the US government seems to be calling on the shots. On all the major rulings, the judge just does what the US government tells her to do. It does feel like, you're in a situation where it certainly doesn't feel like, in any sense, like a fair and impartial court. And it does really seem that the US government is able to call on the shots, including, just to give you one example of that, the US government has said that it objects to any witness saying they were tortured. So we had evidence from Guantanamo victims and extraordinary rendition victims, which goes to what WikiLeaks did in exposing those crimes, and the argument that what WikiLeaks did was a necessary act to expose crime, because you're allowed to, to prevent a greater crime, you're allowed to break a law. But the United States government said it objected to any evidence of torture being given. So the judge ruled that none of the witnesses can say that there was torture in Guantanamo Bay, and the defense lawyers are not allowed to say there was torture in Guantanamo Bay, even though there's nobody in the whole world who doesn't know there was torture in Guantanamo Bay. That's not in dispute as a fact, but it's not allowed to be said in the court because of the objections of the United States government. And there's several other such legal madnesses going on.
Yeah. I want to go back to from the very beginning. I thought many of the witnesses have been spectacular. Tell us about Clive Stafford Smith.
Yeah, he was a tremendous witness. He works for Reprieve, which he founded. He's a lawyer, and he's an attorney, and he's a practicing attorney in the United States, as well as being an attorney here in the UK. And he's represented a lot of the Guantanamo Bay detainees, and his evidence of the extent of war crimes, and his evidence of extent to which WikiLeaks has helped him, and he's been able to use information from WikiLeaks actually in court, in trials. He's been able to use, in American courts, he's been able to use information released from the Afghan war logs and the diplomatic cables in order to help people successfully with their defense. And he also gave evidence on how some of the WikiLeaks material is being used by the International Criminal Court as well on an international basis. So that's very strong and powerful evidence, and of course took people to what this is actually about. This is about Julian Assange being prosecuted for exposing war crimes. That's what this is about.
There's other witnesses that first week. Trevor Timm and Professor Rogers both gave testimony. Can you kind of sum up what they conveyed in that courtroom?
Yeah, Trevor Timm represents a big American NGO which supports press freedom and which represents many thousands of journalists across the United States. And he gave evidence which essentially said that this prosecution is a breach of the First Amendment. And we had him, and we had other journalists and other lecturers in journalism, professors of journalism, to cultivate and encourage sources and get those sources to give you information. And the charge that because although the US government is trying to say that Julian Assange is only charged with publishing a very few of the cables which mention names, he's charged with possession of all of the cables and all of the material, and charged with colluding with and conspiracy with Chelsea Manning to get the material. So if he's found guilty of that, any journalist who cultivates any source, I mean, it would have been illegal. What was done in Watergate with Deep Throat would have been illegal. That would have been conspiracy with the source to get the material. This is going to basically make all investigative journalism illegal if this goes through, and that's what Tim was testifying to in particular, and he was a very, very strong witness.
Yeah,
One of my very favorite moments in the whole trial came when the prosecution have been very aggressive, and with every witness they challenge their expertise and say they're not qualified and they're biased. And they had professors of journalism they've told have known nothing about journalism, and professors of law they've said have known nothing about law, and professors of psychiatry they've said have known nothing of psychiatry. And with Tim, he was giving all this evidence on the First Amendment and on the law regarding journalism, and the prosecution said, "And what makes you able to give an opinion on a matter of law when you're just a journalist?" And Tim replied, "I'm an attorney," because he is an attorney. So that was one of the more amusing moments where the prosecutor hadn't done his homework.
I got to tell you, I think a lot of these witnesses have been very good in responding to the challenges by is it Mark Lewis, the James Lewis. There's James Lewis, there's Eric Lewis, but
yeah, Lewis versus Lewis was a difficult thing to report.
Yes, I know, and I that's the reason why I wait until the next day to read. By the way, before we continue, how do you do it, Craig? You can't take notes in there, from what I understand. You're unable to go in there with a computer and type things out and then bring them home with you. Are you able to do that now?
No, I'm not allowed. You're not allowed. I'm not even allowed to take my mobile phone in. You're not allowed to take any electronic equipment in at all. But you can take in a notepad. So I do it the very old-fashioned way. In fact, I filled this notepad so far. This is 300 pages.
So put that up there.
There we go.
So,
300
wow.
pages all filled up with my terrible handwriting. Those are my. Every day I sit there. So that's an average. And then I've started my second notepad. So now I think I've finished 360 pages. So that's over 13 days.
13 days. So you've got, actually, I know it's up to day 17, which includes the first 3 or 4 days back.
That includes us back in February, March. We had 4 days.
You start number 6. You can get them. You can get all of those, I believe, at craigmurray.org.uk. You can get every single one of your post that day event story features. They're really features. They're not like news articles. They're features. They're all like 3,000 or 4,000 words. How do you do it?
Yeah. No, they average just over 4,000 words. And so if you're going to go back and read, including the February, by now you've got about 70,000 words, which is like a book. But
wait, that's what I did last night. When I found out last night that we were doing this today, I said, you know what? I'm just going to read all of those articles by Craig over the last couple of weeks. And it turns out it's like, my God, it was reading War and Peace. There's so much material that you published over the last 2.5 weeks that I couldn't read all of that. So I had to go, from one to the next, look at your tweets and try to really get absorb everything that you wrote. And, people can get it. I know you're doing this on your own, and people can also subscribe to your column, which they should do. And it's not really a column; it's a daily. How would you describe it, Craig? What you're doing right here? It's different than your past columns that you've written.
Yeah, it is. It's an eyewitness account. I'm careful to certainly give a much fuller account than anyone else has given by a factor of 6 or 7. I mean, other people are turning in 500 pages, 500 words a day, and I'm turning in 4,000 words a day. So, and a lot of it, and about probably 3/4 of that every day is actual reporting of what happens in court, of the words spoken, and fairly, and I hope very fair reporting, giving, in places verbatim, in other places paraphrased or summarized, but giving a blow-by-blow account of what actually happens in court. Then 1,000 words are a comment, usually sometimes interspersed in square an end of comment on explaining what's happening and putting it in perspective and explaining some of the legal issues and terms. But and I mean, to be honest, it is tough. But maintaining that kind of output every day is not easy at all. And I have been, I have been on occasion struggling. I haven't failed. I mean, I've managed every day to get it out, but it very, very often happens. I'm finishing, because the court starts at 10 every day, and I booked this room, which is literally 5 minutes walk from the court. But it happens very often. But at 10 to 10 in the morning, I finished the report of the day before, and at 10 to 10 in the morning, I press publish, and then I literally run to the court and start again. So it has been very, very tough.
Well, who does the editing? So you write these 4,000 word retrospectives the day before. 4,000, that's a lot, right? And you put them out. Does somebody edit for you just to, here and there, or you just do it yourself and send it in?
I mean, I try and get it finished and leave myself half an hour, 40 minutes for proofreading and editing, and I do it all myself. I do have, I have moderators on the blog who moderate the comments and things. And if there are obvious typographical errors left or something, they'll go back and change those. But they don't edit for sense or anything along those lines.
So I urge people to subscribe to support this work, because nobody else is doing it. You're one of the few. I know that you're friendly with one of the closest friends that Julian Assange has had, defenders of Julian Assange. No one's been more consistent and vehement and as cogent as you have. And these daily reports by you certainly should be supported. So you go to craigmurray.org.uk and you read the columns, you read the stories, and you can subscribe right there. Make a small donation to keep this going, because it's not going to end when this ends in the next week and a half. You're going to continue to write. There's going to be appeals. I guess this is a long-term situation for you, plan for you to stay on top of it, Craig.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, as long as this goes, I will keep covering it. Of course, when the hearings and trials aren't on, I write about other stuff as well, and also I do bits and pieces of work for WikiLeaks occasionally, and with other whistleblowers as well. We have a kind of whistleblowers union. We cooperate with each other. So yeah, no, it won't stop. And I should say, people are you don't have to subscribe. I mean, I'm grateful when people subscribe, but it doesn't cost anything to come to the website and read. There's no firewall, there's no advertising, and people are free to just come and read. And the other thing I'd say is that, I do this in order to spread knowledge and spread enlightenment and give people a chance to look at and maybe consider a point of view they haven't considered before or whatever. So anyone is free to copy and paste or republish or translate, do anything they want. I'm putting it out there. I'm not keeping a copyright or ownership over it.
Well, what's important, Craig, what you do here, unlike anybody else, I think it could have influence on the people who are totally in the dark or have prejudged Julian Assange. That is the American public. The American public is totally out. They have no idea because he's been smeared so much from the very beginning by both the UK and the US government. And people here, they don't know. And I think that you really shine a lot of light on this case and on Julian Assange's real character. Tell us about Julian Assange, for those who don't know him, because this is a this is not the regular audience. We're going to an American audience here. Tell us what you know about him personally, the kind of individual. You said he's the smartest person you've ever met. So kind of riff on that for a minute, if you would.
No, Julian is very bright. He's very concerned politically. His political focus is slightly unusual. It doesn't easily fit into narrow political structures. I mean, he's not an American, he's an Australian, but in American terms, you would say he's neither a Republican nor a Democrat. He's not, his politics aren't party politics, let me put it that way. He's broadly libertarian in many of his values, quite left-wing on issues of social justice, but probably not a socialist. I don't think he'd call himself a socialist. But his passion is for openness in government. You know, he thinks that there's far too much mass surveillance, there's far too much secrecy, far too much government secrecy, and there's far too much secrecy also in corporations, and that the average citizen doesn't have power because the average citizen doesn't have the knowledge to make sensible political decisions and to make sensible decisions about their life, because so much is hidden from them by governments and so much is hidden from them by corporations. So Julian's main focus is in getting more and more information to the average citizen so that democracy becomes a much more meaningful concept because people are informed. So that I would say that's the basis of his philosophy, which is pretty simple, but then he has a fantastic grasp of technology and of the internet and of the ways that can be done and of the ways, you know, greater citizen knowledge can be structured. He's a very interesting man, and he's good company and very friendly, very easygoing. And there are things which the media have hinted about him, which are simply completely untrue and are astonishing lies. You know, for example, that his personal hygiene is bad and that kind of thing. You know, in fact there was an article here in the Mail, which is I think Britain's biggest selling newspaper nowadays, yesterday, which was attacking Julian Assange, and one of the things it said was, you know, it is a well-known fact that his personal hygiene is bad. Well, that's just complete nonsense. You know, I mean, just absolutely untrue. His personal hygiene is good, just like any other person. You know, he brushes his teeth and bathes and everything, or showers just as often as anyone else. You know, every day, sometimes several times a day. So much it astonishes me. From the small things like that to the huge things like these ridiculous allegations he was facing in Sweden, some sort of strange honey trap thing going on. Governments have done so much to vilify and calumnize him, and of course the media has joined in, and it's simply not true. When you know him, these things are simply untrue.
Well, the Crown Prosecutor Services, James Lewis, those are the same people that prolonged the investigation by the Swedes. The same agents that are working on behalf of the U.S. government were the ones that had Sweden prolong this fabricated investigation, and emails that were acquired by Stefano Maurizi absolutely adduce to the authenticity of that. So here they are complicit in him being in this position now, and now they're prosecuting him on behalf of the U.S. government. Something very bizarre about that.
It is. It's very peculiar indeed. And also the fact that people just don't know this. You know, people don't know that because there's no evidence, and because basically the Swedish allegations were nonsense when you looked at the details. Swedish prosecutors wanted to drop it nearly 10 years ago. And the British government was saying to them, no, please don't drop it. We need these charges. Because, of course, they were just being used to try to get Assange into prison so he could be sent to the States for the Chelsea Manning revelations, which is now exactly what we are seeing. And one of the peculiar things was, you know, for years when people said, oh, he's in the embassy to avoid going to Sweden, we said, no, he's not. He's in the embassy because he thinks he'll be sent to America because of a Chelsea man. And they said, no, you're lying, you're nonsense, it's not true. Of course he won't be sent to America. And now what happens is they get him, and they're not trying to send him to Sweden, they're trying to send him to America over the Chelsea Manning revelations, which we always knew would be the case.
Yeah, and now, look, there's been so many different angles over the past couple of weeks that you've highlighted. The one with the psychiatrist that got in the day before yesterday that testified, and they tried to challenge his authenticity as a psychiatrist, and then they brought up something with the razor blade, which you were reluctant to talk about. Could you quick, give us a little bit of light on that exchange that happened in the courtroom?
Yeah, I mean, that was astonishing, and it's typical in the sense that you've got Professor Michael Kopelman, who's emeritus professor of psychology at King's College London, and the former head of psychology at Guy's and St Thomas's, which is the best hospital in London. So he's and is on all kinds of World Health Organization psychiatric bodies. So he's as distinguished as you can get, and the prosecution are trying to say he's not qualified to diagnose depression, which is quite astonishing. And one of the things they said was that Julian Assange had fooled him. Julian Assange was malingering and inventing it and had fooled him. And they attacked him because in his medical report, he had mentioned that Julian Assange said that he had been going to kill himself, and he had hidden a razor blade in his prison cell to kill himself, but that the prison guards had found the razor blade and taken it away. And what the prosecution was saying was, this is an example of the professor being stupid, in effect, and not being competent, because actually there never was such a razor blade. And Julian fooled the professor with this story about a non-existent razor blade. But it was like a scene out of a legal drama on TV. It was like a scene out of The Good Wife, or one of those legal dramas that you have in the States. Because while the professor was giving evidence, the defense managed to get to the jail and actually get a copy of the charge sheet. And in fact, I have it sitting in front of me here.
There it is.
That's it. That's a copy of the charge sheet. And the charge sheet. This is the charge sheet from the jail where the prison officers say they were searching his cell and they found he'd hidden half a razor blade. And the prosecution were trying to claim this had never happened. But the fact is, of course, the prosecution of the US and the UK governments, this is their prison. There's no way they didn't know that had happened. They were lying. They were trying to make the professor look stupid by saying there was no razor blade when there was a razor blade, and they knew damn well there was a razor blade. So that's just an example of the kind of abusive process that we're seeing, and it's extremely frustrating. I think prosecution did. I don't know how the prosecution managed to get the charge sheet out of the prison. They did very well there, but I don't know how the defense managed to get it. The defense did very well.
How do they get that charge sheet? I got to tell you, I like this guy Fitzgerald. I think he's doing a fantastic job. What's your assessment of his abilities?
I mean, he's a great guy. He's a very, very decent guy. He's very old-fashioned, in his approach. He's very courtly. He's very serious. He's a real gentleman. He's polite to everybody, even when he's cross-examining witnesses to the other side. He does so in a very polite way. But he's, his logic is ruthless, and his ability to argue is ruthless, and he's very eloquent. He's a complete contrast, of course, with the prosecution lawyers who are aggressive and rude and unpleasant, but
intemperate. They're intemperate, right?
Yeah, very bad-tempered and basically nasty. If this were a jury, I've got no doubt, because the jury would hate the way the prosecution are behaving and the way they hound witnesses and they're rude to them and they insult them and try to anger them to try to put them off their testimony. That wouldn't play well with the jury at all. But of course, there is no jury. There's only one judge, Baraitser, who will make up her mind, except I think she made it up a long time ago.
How visible is it, Craig, from your vantage point, looking down, I guess it's the same setup. It looks like, you know, you're up there in the state looking down. Not the prosecution, but the U.S. government's representatives from the Justice Department sitting behind. Are they still sitting behind, and are they like passing notes? How visible is their role in shaping the prosecution here?
No, that's one thing they've learned. They're not here this time.
They're not?
No, last time they were physically there sitting behind, whereas this time they're watching on a video link, and they're sending their instructions electronically. And you've got a couple of ladies sitting behind, you know, with laptops, who are getting the instructions from the Justice Department and then writing notes on bits of paper and handing them forward. But I think they learned their lesson, that it was very bad publicity for them to be seen to be there directing events. So the Justice Department have a video link. I also learned that William Barr, because they, you know, the judge didn't want Amnesty International and all these people watching on video, it's an extremely secure system. It's not it's not like Zoom or a commercial system. It's a very, very secure system for who can get into it. It's it's a government classification secure system. But I learned that William Barr has his own personal access his own personal link. So Barr is watching in Washington as well.
Well, you've been very critical of Gordon Kronberg. Can you tell us your concerns about Gordon Kronberg from the Justice Department?
Yeah, I mean, the Washington Post has published, and I believe it's true, that most people in the Justice Department were against doing this on First Amendment grounds. They said, this is an attack on the First Amendment too. So very few people were willing to take it on. So the guy they've got is an assistant secretary called Gordon Kronberg at the Justice Department. He's a guy with a very dodgy past, but he gave a lecture at the Cato Institute years ago, and he shocked the people at the Cato Institute because he was too right-wing for them. And as you know, the Cato Institute is a very, very right-wing think tank. And
are you kidding me? He shocked them?
He shocked the Cato Institute by being too right-wing. What he said there in that lecture was that basically you can't always find people guilty in a court of law. So it's very important that you have the ability to use confiscation of profits of crime, that you can take people's houses and cars and things off them without ever finding them guilty. Because he said, I need to be able to punish people even if I can't prove they've done anything wrong. And even the Cato Institute didn't think it was necessarily good for him to be punishing people when he couldn't prove anything against them in court. And the other thing, of course, was Kronberg had this reputation. It was how he started his career, his reputation for going in very hard and confiscating without anyone being convicted, confiscating property and money and vehicles of people he alleged were drug dealers but were never convicted of drug dealing. And of course, the point is that was almost all directed at the black community and at the Latino community. There weren't many white people whose whose property Kronberg was confiscating. And there was another example which was sent to me of an expression he used about a black lawyer in Washington early in his career. And it's an expression which I'm not going to repeat, but it wasn't good at all. His explanation of this, which was contained in an article published in the Washington Post, he has an alarming past. He's also been directly accused of Islamophobia, and another Washington law firm tried to get him taken out of a case by submitting to a judge a formal complaint against him of Islamophobia. And he's been heard to joke in court about, this witness doesn't have any fingernails left, so we don't want to see him on the stand, and that kind of thing. He really seems to be a very, very nasty piece of work. Now, interestingly, most of this you can Google. You Google Gordon Kromberg fingernails or Google Gordon Kromberg Islamophobia, and you'll find stuff. If you Google Gordon Kromberg since this case started, somebody sent me the information by email at the start of this case, and I immediately Googled and I found an old Washington Post article and I found the detail of what he'd called the man. About 2 hours later, when I thought I'd write something about it, I repeated the Google search and it all vanished. All of it had vanished from the internet completely. Fortunately, the person who sent me the information also sent me a text of the article from the Washington Post and the date of it. So I'm going to get someone in the States to actually go down the library and get a physical copy of the Washington Post, and we'll find that one up again.
I think I can arrange that. That shouldn't be a big problem. I have friends that work at the Washington Post, but the big problem is is the unseen hand, or maybe the seen hand, that's engineering this entire prosecution. He's supervising it. Is that it?
Very much so, and not only that, there's an agreement between the British and American governments that in an extradition case, bringing the charge. So, for example, Kromberg has put in an affidavit. He's put in 5 different affidavits. Those are accepted as evidence, and that includes affidavits where he said, that the maximum security prisoner in Florida or Colorado is like a kind of holiday camp, all these wonderful programs that prisoners have, and it's really good, and nobody's in solitary confinement, and all kinds of straight lies. But he can't be called for cross-examination. The defense have no right under these extradition proceedings to cross-examine him on these claims he makes. And there are other witnesses from the United States that they've brought in their own from the Bureau of Prisons. They brought in a couple of witnesses explaining, how lovely maximum security prisons are in the United States, and those people, the defense isn't allowed to cross-examine them either.
I've seen one of the witnesses the other day actually say that the conditions are really nice, but he had never been to that prison in Colorado.
Yeah.
They asked him, well, how do you know that the conditions are nice? And he said that he got it from a Justice Department memo. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And in fact, he said specifically he got it from one of Gordon Kromberg's affidavits. And it's Kromberg has been putting in all this information about what they're basically saying, because you can't extradite someone from the UK if they'll be subject to, long-term solitary confinement, which undoubtedly Julian Assange would be. But they now call it SAMs, S-A-M, Special Administrative Measures, I think it's called, that they hold people who are national security prisoners. They hold them under in the United States. And that involves being, for the first 1 year, you're locked in your cell 24 hours a day. You're only allowed out 3 times a week to take a shower. That's the only time you're allowed out of your cell for the first year. But it's not called, they say it's not called solitary confinement, so it's not solitary confinement. But, it's extraordinary. But the facts of the matter, the facts of how these prisons are really quite well known. But that's not what the Bureau of Prisons say. And what the judge is saying is, we have to take the official version. We have to take the word of the United States government for this.
So is there anything about her that shows any promise of being unbiased at all the rest of the way?
No, I mean, really, the only thing about it, when they were, the only time I've ever seen her look even sort of vaguely human was when the testimony, El Masri wasn't allowed to testify. Defense is read into, of their testimony is read into the record of the court. They themselves haven't testified. I understand they're doing that to Noam Chomsky. They're not going to allow him to testify. They will just read a summary of his evidence into the record of the court. But when El Masri, the extraordinary rendition and torture victim, when his testimony was being read into the court, even though the defense were forced to leave out the details of the torture, that testimony was so moving and horrible about what happened to him in the extraordinary rendition process that I thought that undoubtedly judge was affected by it for a while. You could see she was choking back emotion when that was read out. So she is human. She has some human traits in there, but she just comes over as a very right-wing person who takes an extreme authoritarian security state position on every issue and every ruling. So I'm not at all hopeful. And of course, she's the sole judge. Nobody else has a say but her.
We are talking with Craig Murray, former ambassador from the UK to Uzbekistan, also a diplomat in Western Africa for many years. Poland, had written many books. My favorite, of course, is the one on Sikander Burns, which is a great book. You can get that you go to Craig's Twitter account, Craig Murray org, at his Twitter, and the pinned tweet is Sikander Burns, which is I've read 3 or 4 times. It's a great book, and I want to talk about that with you down the road again, Craig. But I just a couple more of the witnesses. Tom Durkin talking about Assange getting a fair trial here. How effective was his testimony?
He was very good. He's really very sharp, and he carried a lot of weight. It was quite interesting. The prosecution attacked Lewis, the other Eric Lewis, the other American attorney giving similar evidence. The prosecution attacked him quite hard, whereas with Durkin, they seemed to give him a lot of respect, and they weren't really able to make much of a hole in his defense and in his testimony. And he explained how things really are in the United States, how the system really works, how grand juries never refuse to indict, how Julian Assange won't get a fair trial because of there's been so much indoctrination, and because of the way that juries are selected, and because of a particular role of the Eastern District of Virginia. There was a lot of meat there, but of course he's been an attorney for 40 odd years, and is a very distinguished attorney. And I understand as well that I didn't know this, and I've been told this, and it may be wrong information, but I believe it's correct. But Durkin is actually he's a Republican, and a Republican donor. He's not coming from the left angle on this, but his very compelling evidence as a very, very experienced attorney, of high seniority, went down very well indeed with the court, I think.
A couple of the other witnesses that stood out, Daniel Ellsberg, were you able to see his testimony, or was it read in, or could you see it on a monitor?
No, I saw Daniel on the monitor, and he was cross-examined and answered questions, and he, of course, Ellsberg's a brilliant man, and even now he's 89 years old, and he's still he's 89 years old, and he was giving evidence at 5:30 in the morning, California time, but he still was absolutely brilliant. He really was brilliant, and he totally rejected the notion that there was any real difference between him and Julian Assange, and this idea that so-called liberals are trying to say Ellsberg was good, but Assange is bad. He said he left in a lot of names of informers and spies. He said he even left in the name of a secret CIA agent, a Korean who worked for the CIA, who had been involved in in assassinating a senior Korean politician. And the guy was a friend of his, but he didn't even take his name out. He left in hundreds of names, he said, in the Pentagon Papers. So much of what the prosecution are claiming to try to make a difference between the Pentagon Papers and Chelsea Manning stuff, he said there is no difference. No, it's very, very similar. And he said he recognizes the same arguments people said when he published the Pentagon Papers. Hundreds of people would be killed. It would damage American interests. All this stuff was said, exactly the same thing that was said about Julian and Chelsea Manning. He said in both cases it's not true. He was very, very strong. He really was. I do admire Daniel very much.
And I got a feeling the prosecution did not go heavy on him because he's such an icon. Is that the way you saw it?
I think they did try to go heavy on him, but they couldn't. they just couldn't get anywhere. They couldn't lay a glove on him. So they eventually they decided, I think, that because most people have been, many people, prosecution have cross-examined. They've tried to cross-examine them for between 2 and 4 hours to put them under really heavy pressure. But with Ellsberg, they didn't cross-examine him very long at all, because it was very obvious quite soon, that they weren't getting anywhere. And I think they decided the longer Ellsberg was on the stand, the more it would damage your prosecution. So they wrapped up their cross-examination really quite quickly.
Yeah, he was great. That same day, John Getz, and it's already been like 10 days ago, John Getz came out and talked about the how the rigorous redaction process that Julian Assange and WikiLeaks employs. Can you talk about that, Craig?
Yeah, we've had a number of witnesses who were all part of that redaction process. When they started together with media partners, including the New York Times, to redact any names that might be in danger out of publication before things were published. And Gertz was one of many people who were actually involved in that redaction process, who testified to how serious that process was and how personally committed and concerned Julian was to make sure no names were published that would get anybody killed or put anyone in serious harm's way. And then how eventually, of course, that all went wrong when journalists from the Guardian newspaper published the password to the unencrypted files in a book. Stupidly. I don't think he did it out of badness. I think they just weren't thinking properly. But no, that was good information. And Gertz was an impressive witness.
But that entire thing there, that WikiLeaks had protected individuals, they did not publish the names, and it was somebody else that did, and it was the Guardian, and also there were other servers that kept and still have the material from back then on their websites.
We've heard that in great detail, that WikiLeaks was trying to redact names and make everything safe before they published it. Then the Guardian published the password in a book. Then eventually that got put together with the file to which it was a password got found on the internet. And then things started to be published. First of all, in a torrent or two, then on a couple of obscure websites, then on torrent on Pirate Bay, which of course was very popular. And then Cryptome published the full unredacted files before WikiLeaks did. And neither Cryptome hasn't ever been prosecuted. Nobody from Pirate Bay has ever been prosecuted. And the Wayback Machine has had all this material on since the very day it was published, and they've never been prosecuted. The only person being prosecuted is Julian. So that that's quite interesting evidence.
It really, there's so many good witnesses. Kerry Shankman, I want to get to him before we come to an end. Kerry Shankman, who talked about the Espionage Act, is an expert on the Espionage Act. Can you summarize what Kerry had testimony on that day regarding the Espionage Act and how it affected Julian Assange?
What Kerry Shankman was basically saying was that governments over the years, presidents especially over the years, have often considered using the Espionage Act against journalists and against publications, but that they've never done it because of the First Amendment. They've always backed off. And what was really important, and this was absolutely vital, but it wasn't what Kerry Shankman was saying, it was what the prosecution was saying and cross-examining him, which is absolutely vital. What the prosecution said was that the Rosen judgment, which was the IPAC case, the Rosen judgment said that you can prosecute journalists under the Espionage and you can prosecute publishers under the Espionage Act. And prosecution also said that if you look at the New York Times judgment in the Washington Post case, the Supreme Court said, they say in the dicta, in the explanation given by 3 of the Supreme Court judges in the New York Times case over the Pentagon Papers, 3 of the judges stated that the New York Times could have been prosecuted under the Espionage Act. So the American government was openly claiming They could have prosecuted the New York Times under the Espionage Act, claiming they can publish any journalist under the Espionage Act if he possesses any classified information. And that's a huge threat to freedom of the press. And the US government was arguing this very, very openly in court. And because neither the New York Times nor the Washington Post or any of them were paying any attention, nobody has noticed. But the practice of, they were saying, no, you're wrong, Shenkman. The First Amendment doesn't apply because it's national security. So we can prosecute any journalist who obtains national security information. And the representatives of the US government were taking that position very, very openly in court. And it astonishes me that the US media haven't picked up on that. It really does astonish me.
No, is the Crown Prosecutor Services actually subscribe to this notion, or are they just mouthpieces, like being, being handled from behind? Do they actually subscribe? Do they really believe in the things that they're saying here?
Well, the extradition process is such, and the treaty with the United States on extradition is such, that they are just acting as agents for the United States government. There is no independent view of the British government in the mix. We don't hear what the British government thinks, but the Crown Prosecution Service simply represents the United States government in this process. It's very, very weird. It's the way that Britain's extradition treaty with the United States works. And yet we can't extradite anyone from the United States. It's very, very peculiar. It makes no sense at all. This was Tony Blair and George Bush, and they the legislation dates from 2003 and the treaty from 2007. And this was done in the post 9/11 war on terror atmosphere, because they were just thinking about moving Al-Qaeda people around, and that led to such a huge attack on human rights and whatever. And so this is awful legislation. In the UK, the legislation under which this is being done is terrible anti-human rights legislation. But it's coming to the States. The American government is now claiming the First Amendment doesn't apply at all in any national security case, and they're openly claiming that. So the ramifications of this are enormous.
Well, they have made a case. They've done this from the very beginning, witness here and there, that this is a political case. And in that extradition treaty, it's forbidden to send people over to this country from the UK under that extradition treaty for political reasons, if it is a political case. They've made this clear, don't you think, over the past 3 weeks, that this is a political case?
I think it's clearly a political case. I mean, it's mostly a political case because Julian Assange is acting from political motives, and his publishing this material was a political act, and it was a political act designed to stop war crimes and to stop war. It was done with a public policy motivation. It wasn't done for money or for any other kind of gain. It was a political act, so it is a political offence. The defence has added another layer to that by trying to say that it was a political decision by Trump to prosecute. And yeah, I suppose you could say that's true. I'm not especially fond of that argument myself, because it's not necessary. Because the treaty doesn't say that you can't extradite where the prosecution is politically motivated. What it says is you can't prosecute you can't extradite for a political offence. And the offence, i.e. the publication of these documents, which of course isn't an offence anyway, it's First Amendment protected, but if you call it an offence, was politically motivated. It was a political act, and it's the act of publishing, and whether that was political is actually much more important than whether or not Trump took a political decision. I'm not quite certain why the defence has wasted so much time on that particular angle, but there you are.
The contribution by WikiLeaks is monumental. John, I think, Sloboda, and both he and Dean Yates from Reuters both spelled out some of the work that WikiLeaks had published over the last 10 years, particularly going back 10 years ago. What did you see from witnesses like them, Craig?
No, that's true. I mean, it's actually been a tremendous reminder of just how much WikiLeaks have done, and of course, this is all about Afghanistan and Iraq and the war logs and the Guantanamo detainee briefings, the details. But then there's all the information from all around the world, from the diplomatic cables detailing American crimes and political corruption and the deals the American government makes with politicians abroad. But it's been fantastic to be reminded of just how valuable WikiLeaks is, because of course that's something else which has been deliberately gone out of the public narrative.
I just want to, like, before we leave, Craig, the atmosphere inside there. You've been there. How does Julian look inside the courtroom? How is his father doing? What's the spirit in that courtroom? And particularly, how does Julian, health-wise, appear to you compared to the last time we saw him in February?
He looks much better than when we saw him in February. He's been out of solitary confinement, which since about June, I think. And since he came out of solitary confinement, he's become much, much better. He's put a little weight back on, and he doesn't look so much like a zombie. He's able to hold conversations with people and look a little more cheerful. Obviously, he's drawn a great deal of strength from seeing people, and also the court itself is not so oppressive. I mean, from where he's not in a complete glass cage like he was in Belmarsh. Although the dock is glass fronted, it's open at the top. So, for example, from where I am in the gallery, I can look down on him and he can look at me with no glass between us at all. Because also the public gallery's not got glass.
Oh, really? So, in other words, it's opener, and you can see the judge, and you can see.
Without looking for
how many people are in that courtroom? Are there reporters there? Is it the same? No.
Reporters are off in a video room somewhere. But there are lots of lawyers. There may be 20 people in the courtroom, I guess. And it's not. But it's quite an oppressive. The judges' rulings have been so one-sided, and the whole process is so one-sided. But the defense lawyers are genuinely angry a lot of the time. You can see, there's real, proper anger from the defense lawyers much of the time, which is interesting to see. But we knew that. I mean, we always knew we were up against an oppressive and unfair system. So there's no real surprise there. But and of course, it's very horrible that if Julian is sent to the States and does end up in one of these terrible maximum security prisons, he'll be in solitary confinement probably for the rest of his life. Life will be a living hell. So having that horror thought at the back of your mind the whole time. I'm always amazed his father manages to be quite so, not cheerful, but quite so steadfast and not let it get him down. His father, John, seems to be a very strong man. I spend all day, every day I'm with John. So
just like you were the last time. The first 4 days back in February, you were there sitting next to him.
And I've been sitting next to him every day.
And then during lunch, you guys would sit around. Yeah, he's a remarkable individual. And I do like Fitzgerald. He's a very phlegmatic guy. In spite of the odds that he's facing, he just goes right on through with it he's unflappable. He just keeps moving. And so does the other lawyer whose name I can't think of right now.
Mark Summers, yeah.
Yeah, Summers is very good. I think he's well represented. And it doesn't matter if he had Clarence Darrow and William Kunstler and 100 great lawyers from the past. They're in a situation where it's already predetermined. That's the way I look at it. And that's the way I saw it back in February. And from reading your daily output, I feel exactly the same. And I don't know how you feel about that, but I think you've made it clear that you do believe that.
Yeah, no, that's not changed. I think the only thing that make it any difference is if there's a change in political decision from the top, because it's judges obeying political orders. So And I've no reason to believe there will be a change, but that's the only thing that would make a change. It's nothing that happens in that courtroom is going to affect the decision.
Right. So this give us a upcoming is what we got 1 week left of this, and then the prosecution puts on their case. How is it working? 2 weeks left?
No, we have 1 week left, and then that's it. And they're not even, the judge has said that the public aren't going to hear the closing arguments. She's not going to allow closing speeches. They just have to submit their closing arguments in writing, and that's it. So the witnesses finish the end of next week, and that's it, basically. And the prosecution witnesses we're not going to see because you're not allowed to cross-examine them. So they won't be giving evidence at all. Their evidence just goes in writing to the judge, and the defense can't challenge it.
So we're looking at a what's tantamount to a Supreme Court overturning whatever ruling she puts out there. If it's negative for Julian, we're kind of banking on that.
I'm very confident about that. I mean, I'm really very confident. If you ask me to bet money, I would bet large amount of money that what's going to happen is this judge will say he should be extradited, and then it will go to appeal, and on appeal, the High Court will overturn that because the case, legally, the case stinks, and a lot of the rulings of this judge have been. And once you get to the High Court, you've got much. I guess it's similar to the Supreme Court in the States in the sense, once you get judges of that seniority, you can't promote them anymore. So they are independent because they're at the top of their profession, and no one can do any favors for them. No one can get rid of them. So so they're able to take a properly independent view. And I think once you get very senior judges who aren't so subject to government influence, I think this will just get chucked out. But the problem is, of course, before we get to that stage, I mean, this case has run for 18 months, and it'll be at least a year, I guess, before any appeal is heard. So before we get to that stage, the judge has said she'll give her judgment in January, in this case, then another year before an appeal starts. So that would be, January 2022 before an appeal starts. Then maybe a year and a half for that case to run. So then June, but the earliest Julian would get out on this basis is getting on for 2004. That's
like he's spending 5 years in jail.
Yeah.
It's pre-trial detention in the U.S. 5 years, and then if he comes over here, another year. It's just been such a nightmare odyssey for this great, heroic journalist, publisher. And I know it's difficult for you and for his family and his friends to have to witness this on a regular basis. I mean, it's tough on me, and I'm way over here. And I've only known him for 3 or 4 years. You've known him for a long time. He's very close. And whatever we can do, Craig, I don't know, except for hopefully he'll either get a pardon, which I'm not banking on, or there's a change in the administration, and then they withdraw the complaint. I don't know, but we got to go forward. What about your case, Craig? Before we wrap up, you still have an outstanding case in Edinburgh, or is it in Glasgow? Your particular case. Do you want to talk about that, or just leave it?
No, I'll briefly say that the government's trying to shut me up and stop me writing, and they're trying to put me in jail for contempt of court for basically writing that the Alex Salmond case, which is a whole different subject I won't go into, but the Alex Salmond case was a conspiracy, and he wasn't guilty. And in the end, the jury found it was a conspiracy, and the jury found he wasn't guilty. So I wrote the truth. But the powers that be don't like the articles I wrote, so they're accusing me of contempt of court for writing that, because they're saying my articles could have influenced the jury. So they're trying to put me in jail for 2 years for that. That comes up in evidence change. It's quite interesting. Julian, of course, what's happening to Julian is far worse than what's happening to me. But in both cases, no one's claiming anything we wrote was a lie. everyone's saying it was true. I'm saying, what they're saying to me is, you wrote too much of the truth. You shouldn't have done that because you could have influenced the jury. So it's all very strange. But that comes up in January. But also, Randy, at some stage we've got to do this again, and we've got to discuss how on earth the United States has managed to come up with a political system that means the effective choice for president is always between two of the nastiest people in the entire country. That's very strange.
It's between, as Cornel West said, a neoliberal disaster and a neo-fascist catastrophe. It's really, what do you do with these two? It's as bad as 2016. Heads I lose, tails I lose. It doesn't matter, man. It's really a bad choice, and I don't know what I'm going to do on election day or if it matters. Yeah, it's horrible. It's fucking horrible. I haven't used that word in a long time, but this is really
my advice, Randy, is on election day, go down a bar and forget about it.
I'm going to see you at that place over there by Parliament, that old bar that was downstairs way back on February 22nd, when you gave this wonderful speech, as usual, not using notes, Greg. You just go up there and speak off the top of your head. And, just a little advice for people out there. I've never done my comedy with notes. I've never done the same act twice. It's got me into a lot of trouble, but it keeps me interested if I'm doing something off the top of my head. Is that the way you feel about not using prepared remarks?
Yeah, completely. I always give a speech off the top of my head. I never because if you don't know what's coming next, the audience don't know what's coming next either, and it makes it all much more fun. And there's nothing worse than politicians with these glass screens in front of them with the words on, so only visible from one side, reading away some lot of rubbish that's been written for them by somebody else. Speak from the heart. Get up there and tell them what you think. That's my advice to anyone giving a talk about anything.
Well, I don't know. In the House of Commons, they seem to be talking off the top of their head. Certainly not in the U.S. Congress. Maybe that's a tradition there, where you do have better.
You're not allowed to read anything while you speak in the House of Commons. Reading is not permitted. So you can't look at notes while you're talking in the House of Commons. You would be stopped, and except when they're doing question and answer sessions, when the Prime Minister is allowed to have notes in front of him, but by and large, reading is not permitted in speeches in the House of Commons.
Well, that includes a speech by Churchill, where
he
to the hills we shall go into.
He wouldn't have been allowed to read that. He would have had to have memorized it and stated it.
Well, Craig Murray, craigmurray.org.uk, Craig Murray org at Twitter. And I guess you're going to get a nice weekend of rest and then go back to the Old Bailey on Monday and pump out. You have one coming out tonight or tomorrow for day 7?
Yeah, I haven't. Because I haven't discussed it, but my daily routine, I go into the court. Court starts at 10, it finishes at 5. 5 o'clock I come home. I'll have something to eat. I'll go to sleep at 6, and I'll sleep from 6 till 10. And I wake up at 10, I'll have a coffee, I'll start writing, and it takes me about 8 hours to write. So I'll write till 6 or 7 in the morning, then I'll have another cup of coffee, I'll iron my shirt or whatever, get ready, have a shower, shave, proofread what I've written, publish it, and then I'll go again. So I'm getting, maybe 5 hours sleep a night, I guess, and doing nothing at all except writing. That's it. That's all I'm doing. And it's quite tough. But I start. So on Friday, Friday has come. So I go out for a drink. I have a dinner with friends. Saturday I relax, and I don't work right up Friday until the Sunday. And then that gives me a chance to add some end of the week thoughts, if you see what I mean. Then Monday I get back into that hard routine again.
Wow. Well, it's really great stuff, and I commend you for it. You're doing. I don't like it. Well, I'm not an atheist, so I can say you're doing God's work. Okay. So and we all appreciate it. Everybody has remarked about Craig Murray's writing on the trial. It's the best stuff out there, Craig. And it is a trial of the century, even though the century is only 10 years old, but 20 years old. But it really is the trial of the century. And thank you for chronicling it, and this for posterity. When they look back, they're going to look at your writing, Craig. And Craig Murray, once again, visit his website and get all 17 reports from the Old Bailey and from Belmarsh going back to February. Once again, thank you for your great public service, Craig Murray. And,
Thank you, Andy. Good to talk.
We'll be right back, folks, with some closing remarks.
Everybody knows that the dice are loaded. Everybody rolls with their fingers crossed. Everybody knows the war is over. Everybody knows the good guys lost. Everybody knows that the fight was fixed. The poor stay poor, the rich get rich. That's how it goes. Everybody knows. Everybody knows that the boat is leaking. Everybody knows the captain lied. Everybody got this broken feeling, like their father or their dog just died. Everybody talking to their pockets. Everybody wants a box of chocolates and a long stem rose. Everybody knows.
So how was that? Craig Murray. It's been a while. It's been 4 months, but it was worth the wait. Doesn't get any better than that. And so I'm just going to say thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting our program, Assange Countdown to Freedom. And if you'd like to support us, we have a few bills. Please do AssangeCountdownToFreedom.com. And I want to thank Kelly Lane down there in North Carolina for her tremendous work. I want to thank Sarah and Emily and Margaret Kunstler for helping out on my end here. And we'll be back soon. I really can't follow that show with Craig Murray. I'm going to be a while, folks. All right, maybe another week. So we're going to go out, got an election coming up, a lot of violence by right-wing groups and stuff like that in the U.S. So let's go out with Ohio by Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Neil Young, who wrote it.
Twin soldiers and Nixon coming, we're finally on our own. This summer I hear the drumming, 4 days.